I am the guardian of forever.
Ah, time travel. A theme of many science fictions, but particularly heavily used in the Star Trek franchise. But is it logical? I actually, for the most part, really despise time travel plots. They make no sense whatsoever. Though I may enjoy the shows with them, they drive me crazy. Why? Glad you asked. What happens when our heroes, any of them, jump around in time? Well, mostly a lot of nothing. They hop back in time, solve a problem, or because of a problem, and then find a way to return to their own time with no peculiarities, shall we say, whatsoever. This should not be the case. Let's take a quick look at the Star Trek The Original Series episode, The City on the Edge of Forever, a screenplay written by none other than Harlan Ellison. In this episode, Enterprise encounters heavy time wave distortions. During one of these waves, Sulu is injured when a console bursts into sparks and flames. McCoy comes to the bridge and uses a highly dangerous drug to bring Sulu around. But when another wave comes along, McCoy winds up slipping and injecting the entire remaining contents of the medical vial into himself. He goes insane, then transports himself down to the planet below. By the way, why weren't the transporters disabled during a security event while he was loose and insane, running around the ship? I know. It would be no plot. A search party goes down to the planet to find and recover him so he can be treated. When they arrive on the surface, they find a time portal, which McCoy promptly jumps through, changing things, and everything they knew, the Enterprise, Starfleet Command, the United Federation of Planets, etc., ceases to exist. Except, of course, for all of them. They still exist. They seem to be protected by the bubble surrounding the Guardian of Forever. But everything outside that bubble, well, gone. Which presents a problem. More on that in a moment. Kirk and Spock follow McCoy into the portal, recover him, fix what he broke. Okay, I can live with that a little. But they also stop him from injecting himself with the drug. When they return, the Guardian announces that time has resumed its shape. All is as it was before. Many such journeys are possible. Let me be your gateway. Houston, we've had a problem. In fact, a couple of problems. Paradox alert. Around the time Einstein presented his general theory of relativity, conversations between scientists on the possibility of time travel, with the requisite debates and, face it, arguments, took off. Out of these debates and arguments came theories on what has become mostly known as the grandfather paradox. What is the grandfather paradox? To paraphrase, suppose I invent a time machine, however improbable, and travel back in time to a period before my paternal grandfather sired any of his children, including my father. Now, I've gone back in time. What do? I look up my grandfather, and for whatever reason, I decide I don't like him, and I decide to eliminate him.
Bearing this in mind, Jim.
My father will not be born, and because my father will not be born, I will not be born. And since I will not be born, there will be no time machine. And therefore my grandfather will not be eliminated. Therefore, since my grandfather will not be eliminated because I don't exist, he sires my father who sires me. I then invent my time machine, go back in time and eliminate my grandfather, and so on ad nauseum. Whew. So, where am I going with this? Let's go back to our first example. McCoy going back in time and breaking the timeline. When he goes back in time, he prevents the death of Edith Keeler, and so the timeline is now broken. She was supposed to die by being hit by a truck. As she is a peace activist, and McCoy has prevented her death, she gets a meeting a few years in the future with and convinces Roosevelt not to go to war, which allows the Germans to develop an atomic bomb, after which they win the war and rule the world. So now the Enterprise doesn't exist. Starfleet Command doesn't exist, and the Federation of Planets does not exist. Very probably McCoy never exists. So here we go. How can he have gone back in time to break the timeline if he doesn't exist? And since he can't have gone back in time and broken the timeline, then the timeline must be as it was before. But then he goes back in time and breaks it because he now exists and everything is as it was, but can't because, well, you get the picture. Now let's look at the next problem. They proposed to stop McCoy from injecting himself with the dangerous medication. And if they did that, how? Going back to the ship in time to stop the accident would place 2 captains, 2 Spocks, and 2 McCoys on the ship. Talk about confusion and absolute suspicion. Then if they do prevent the accident from happening, oops, here we go again with the grandfather paradox. Around, and around, and around, and around she goes, and where she stops, nobody knows, if it stops at all. These kind of cause and effect paradoxes can really bake your brain. But you can see why I dislike time travel themes in science fiction. They just don't make sense. As Spock would have said, most illogical. There are several episodes of Star Trek which abuse time travel. Among these episodes are All Our Yesterdays, City on the Edge of Forever, which we just covered, Assignment Earth, and Tomorrow is Yesterday. This one really annoys me, especially due to the solution at the end. And there are numerous episodes of other portions of the Star Trek franchise which also delve into time travel and equally do not work. Is there any TV show or movie I feel did time travel justice? Well, sort of. I have never watched it, but I read a spoiler for a movie called The Butterfly Effect. And I think they kind of got it right to a degree in this movie. Every time Ashton Kutcher's character goes back in time to fix something, he breaks the timeline and something horrid comes of it, such as losing his arms to an explosion. His solution in the end sort of fixed things, but it still put him into a completely different timeline from where he was before. The butterfly effect, by the way, gets its name from a real theory. The butterfly effect is the sensitive dependence on initial conditions in which a small change in one state of deterministic nonlinear system can result in large differences in a later state. Wow, that is a mouthful. I hope this is a little bit simpler. The phrase refers to the idea that a butterfly's wings might create tiny changes in the atmosphere that may ultimately alter the path of a tornado or delay, accelerate, or even prevent the occurrence of a tornado in another location. The butterfly does not power or directly create the tornado, but the term is intended to imply that the flap of the butterfly's wings can cause the tornado in the sense that the flap of the wings is part of the initial conditions of an interconnected complex web. One set of conditions leads to a tornado while the other set of conditions doesn't. Still fairly complex. Let's try this. To simplify it further, I once heard it described sort of this way. Suppose that the weather dude says tomorrow it will be cloudy, cool, and rainy. However, in the next little while, a butterfly in Asia somewhere flaps its wings, causing ripples in the wind patterns, which affects the jet stream, which causes the weather dude's prediction to be wrong. Instead of cloudy, cool, and rainy, it's sunny and warm. That's a big one to digest. So guess what? Eggheads have come up with a solution, after a fashion, to the whole question of changing things in the past and breaking the timeline thing. No more linear timelines. It's alternate realities, parallel universes, and alternate timelines. I think, from what I've seen, the movie The Flash sort of gets it right. But they deviate from there being one linear timeline, and that there are parallel timelines and realities. And as the older Bruce Wayne, played by Michael Keaton, says, mess with the timeline and get a hot mess.
It's a hot mess.
The two Barry Allens, the Flashes, wind up fixing things in the end. Everything goes back to the way it was at the beginning. Except, in the final clip, we see that they aren't quite right. They're close, but no cigar. Bruce Wayne in Barry's world is now portrayed by George Clooney instead of Ben Affleck, who portrayed Wayne at the beginning of the movie and warned Barry not to mess with time. I do have one time travel story which I really like. H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. And I do like the George Pal version filmed in 1960. Our intrepid time traveler jumps to the future, then home. Whatever he breaks will be far past where he wound up in the future. But he does return to our timeline, or to his timeline, if you're rather, picks up a few things, and then returns back to the future he left in order to help the Eloi to survive. And he stays there. There have been numerous shows which tried to rely on time travel at some point or in total. Space 1999 sent several of our heroes back to Earth about 20 years after the Battle of Bannockburn because of an experimental transporter meant to send them to Earth, which instead glitched due to an earthquake at the receiving station on Earth. The Time Tunnel was an Irwin Allen production revolving completely around the subject of time travel. How they didn't completely screw up the timeline with everything they did is a complete mystery. Here's a few more. Quantum Leap, Doctor Who, of course, Outlander, and more. Movies which also included time travel in some form included Looper, Deadpool 2, X-Men, The Flash, and on the list goes. Time travel? No thanks. I don't think it works. And the storylines always wind up messed up in some form. I do not believe in alternate universes, alternate or parallel timelines, or alternate realities. I believe in one linear timeline in which all of mankind and every other living thing is trapped, and we have to go through it with no way out. Time floods us along like a fast-moving river, and only God is outside of it.